If you struggle in relationships, one of the chief reasons is likely your attachment style. In this video, I'm going to explain attachment styles, teach you how to identify yours, and what to do if it's less than functional. Hi, my name is John Hawkins Jr. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, certified trauma specialist, and co-founder of Hawkins Counseling Center. In my experience, a lot more people have heard of attachment styles. Clients of mine come in having read books on attachment, articles, YouTube videos. People are much more educated about attachment styles. But what they don't seem to have information about is how to alter less than functional ones, or what they call insecure attachment styles. So I'm going to quickly take you through the dominant attachment styles that are referred to in psychology, explain a little of them, also how that we don't quite fit into neat little boxes, and then we're going to work on teaching you some things practical and scientific that you can do to start to shift yours towards a more secure style. So the first one is a secure attachment style. This was, infants, children, and adolescents who were raised in environments where the parents could regulate their emotions, responded to their kids, whether it was excitement, joy, sadness, fear, shame, whatever that was, and they could help the child co-regulate that emotional energy and integrate it back into their personal experience. And so then they believe that they're going to get responded to, that are worthy of getting responded to, and that they can trust that. So for most people, maybe that happens sometimes, maybe it happened not at all. And so they had to develop different adaptations to not getting that. And that's what these insecure styles refer to. So the first is what's called an avoidant attachment style. That's where in conflict, I'll give you kind of the childhood origins and then how that manifests itself in adult relationships. So with the avoidant, the child kept turning into either chronic misattunement, emptiness, the parent was maybe either dissociated or just emotionally not that skilled. And so, they would not get what they needed in terms of attachment, or they would turn into criticism, negativity. And so it's painful to turn into emptiness or criticism. And so the child just neurologically dissociated the need for attachment on some level emotionally, and then just learned how to withdraw and become a one-person system. I could soothe myself, amuse myself. Many of these attachment styles came out of videoing, tracking, and observing toddlers and their mothers on what they call the strange situation, where the child would be left. How did they respond to getting left to like a preschool environment? Did they protest? Were they indifferent? Would they go into a panic? And then how the reunion looked when the mother or parent came back, how did they respond? Were they happy to see the parent? Were they angry? Were they, again, detached or indifferent to it? So in adulthood, the avoidant attachment tends to withdraw during conflict. So that might be you might be married or in a relationship with somebody who has an avoidant attachment, which then typically will trigger things like abandonment or shame for their partner, because they feel like, why am I not, worth you turning towards me and working through this with me or responding to me? Because in their biology, turning towards attachment will get very dysregulating to their nervous system. So they want to get away from it, learn how to soothe myself, a lot of solitary activity sometimes. And again, these things can happen on a continuum. So, somebody could be lesser or greater in their level of avoidance or withdrawal. So that can be, again, very abandoning or frustrating for the partner. The second is what they call an ambivalent attachment. So this is where there was attachment and there was attuned parenting at times and that co-regulation, but I couldn't trust it. Maybe the parent had issues with substances. So when they were sober, they were great and attuned. Maybe they were detached or, reactive when they were on, substances. Maybe the parent had emotional challenges. So it would be up and down emotionally. So I had like loving dad and then rage dad. So I stayed open, but I couldn't trust it. So it leaves a lot of, adaptive intent with the child, just kind of tracking disconnection. Some of it when there's a pattern that the child could at least, recognize, they could get out ahead of it. Other times it's so erratic with trauma and other things, and so it kept the child in a chronic state of anxiety. The way that manifests in adulthood is the person will often fear abandonment, disconnection. They have a lot of anxiety, which many times flips into anger. So they pursue, chase, criticize, react, in severe cases like explosive, throwing stuff, attacking, because they're so flooded with, panic or fight or flight whenever the disconnection occurs. It lights up those implicit memories I always talk about in the body and just dumps all that neurochemically in. The third dominant insecure style they talk about in all these attachment literature, attachment books that you might have read is disorganized. So this typically develops when there's severe neglect, abuse of various kinds. So the source of safety and comfort is the threat. So the child's really torn between instinctually wanting to go towards the parent for the security or the comfort, but they're the threat, so another part of them wants to pull away from it. So in child development, they call it fright without solution. There's just no adaptive response, so it creates a lot of neurological dissociations. There's nowhere for the child to go other than to split off in their mind what they can't handle or regulate. So the way that looks in adulthood is the person may become highly confused or erratic or reach for substances or some compulsive behavior to regulate all that trauma and energy, very reactive. And like I was mentioning earlier, in reality, people don't fit into nice little categories, but can be, if you think of like a pie chart, can be a combination of a bunch of different styles. I look at my own attachment history, and there was a big element where there was secure characteristics. For most of my adult life, I could see myself in conflict with the avoidant attachment, where I would start to withdraw from other more painful things I'd been through. There were moments of disorganization. And then later on, even more currently, there was things that had come up with like more of the anxious attachment with the ambivalence. And so that had never really been part of my profile until like the last decade. And so again, so you might think like I'm an ambivalent or I'm an avoidant, but it could switch. You could develop a different pattern with mom or dad, where you adapted to each of them differently. And that's really what they primarily are, is adaptions. But because they got imprinted so early during our development, they're in the more primitive parts of the brain, they're embedded in these implicit networks in our body. And so they're really fast and they take over quicker than conscious thought. So when I'm working with relationships and couples come in, a lot of times they're so fixated on the content of what they're talking about. What they don't realize is what's the biggest driver of their conflict cycles and dysfunction is actually happening from the neck down, and it's nonverbal. So in therapy, we really want to work on this somatic narrative versus the verbal. So I'm going to walk you through now a few steps of how you can start to work with your attachment style and actually shift it into a more secure style. And I'm going to give you practical things you can do, and then the different types of therapies that we do at our center that are very attachment focused that can really help alter these things for you. So the first step, then, if you're watching this video, you're doing that right now, is to educate yourself. So it's really positive for me that so many people walk into my office and they're already have a level of education about attachment styles, or maybe have even identified how some of theirs originated. What they're really lacking is what to do with it. You know, they have this knowledge, but they're like, okay, it doesn't change anything. I keep doing the same thing, so I'm more frustrated with myself. So really educating yourself and developing that self-awareness of like tracking. You know, I talk a lot about that in therapy. We're tracking and observing the present here and now experience, particularly in the body, what's coming up as a felt sense, so you can really start to identify that. So then think in terms of like when I need to reach for connection, how I do or don't, or how I receive a partner reaching for needs or connection. You know, like if a parent put their needs on me, then that can trigger a part of me that wants to get away from it because it feels too much, or I'm going to get it engulfed or swallowed. And then, you know, just notice what's happening in your body and some of your interactions in your relationship. Or if you're not in mind, think back to times I was, when the brain sees an image, the body sees it or experiences it the same as if it's seeing and experiencing out here. So you can actually activate things by seeing them in your mind's eye and understand, like, how do I usually show up? What parts of me show up in relationships? What are some of the experiences that trigger that for me? You know, is it a complaint from my partner, a need request that causes me to withdraw? Or if they're going, you know, on a trip for business or an outing with friends, does that trigger a lot of fear and anxiety or shame for me? You know, just noticing that without judgment, but just curiosity. What are some of the things or the stories I tell myself when that happens? Whether it's I'm unsafe, or nobody cares, or I'll never be good enough, I'm unlovable, whatever the associations are. So just starting with self-awareness is that first step. So the second step really dovetails off the first, and that's practicing mindfulness, which is just noticing in the present what's happening without judgment, but just having awareness with that tracking and observing. Like I just mentioned, You really want to do this with self-compassion, non-judgment. You bear no responsibility whatsoever for how these attachment styles were formed. You couldn't even talk in most cases when the originations of them were there. So it's our responsibility now, and we do have the power to change them of what we do with them. But don't come from this judgmental place, or I'm this, or I'm reactive, or I'm borderline, or I'm narcissistic, all these different shame-based identity things. But just start to really notice, what is happening in my body? What are the thoughts that come up, when these kind of situations happen, where I have maybe start to think of other alternative options of what I could do in those moments, just rather than this automatic hijacking that just takes over me. Now, I know in trauma, some of that is easier said than done, because that trauma is really fast and really intense, and so I might not be able to do that till after the fact. Just get it from wherever you can get it from, so I can go back and reflect, what was it that triggered me so much when I just got hijacked and I blacked out and I was just in anger or panic, and it felt so excessive to the situation, because again, it's those implicit memories getting triggered for you. The next step is really, you can get a long way starting to educate yourself, starting to track things somatically or physically, starting to attempt and try different patterns of behavior based on how challenging that is, like as I mentioned with trauma. Start doing everything you can do in that area to really shift these biologically at the deepest level and break free from these attachment patterns. In my opinion, not just because of what I do, but I would definitely say you need to work with a therapist who does attachment-based modalities or models of therapy. There's a few that I use in particular, working with relationships, or if my clients come in individually. For me, the most effective one to work with attachment systems is called AEDP, and that stands for Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy. And it's really grounded in attachment, working with the therapist, whether it's a relational context with a couple or an individual, where we really can track in the moment experience that comes up and start to create reparative, corrective experiences, and focusing on that at a felt level. Because what happens is, just like these attachment styles are really adaptions, not just something you're stuck or born with and you're doomed, is when we couldn't get that attuned response emotionally, we had to develop ways to block our emotions or that energy, which cuts us off from the internal resources that they're designed to bring. So, those were necessary, whether it was disassociation, anger for sadness, sadness for anger, whatever the defense was, we had to do that. We didn't have any alternatives in the moment. But now when it comes up spontaneously, it just replicates this defensive, insecure style. So in ADP, what we're really focused on is tracking these in-the-moment experiences that come up as a therapist, creating a corrective experience, and then focus on the felt sense of that. What does it feel like to get heard, to get responded to, and then to get the connection I need to co-regulate those emotions that I usually have to block and defend against. And also, we develop relational defenses that end up sabotaging people's future relationships. So we also focused on the relationship between me and the client of that experience. So maybe I say something affirmative and I ask them what happens when I say that. I kind of push that away, or part of it gets in, part of it doesn't. And so we want to focus directly on the experience. We call that receptive capacity. So if the person can't receive good things about themselves, right, they can't get the corrective experience to take in good things, because maybe what they got in the past was a lot of shaming and criticism. So part of them had to start to block that to mitigate the pain, but now that part of them, that defense relationally, blocks good things and connection and healthy intimacy from coming in, and it continues to sabotage their life. So I talk a lot about neuroplasticity in these videos, where we want to get your nervous system, your brain rewired in a different way, which is an amazing thing, that we have this potential all the way to death, not just during our development. So to achieve that, we need experience, and then to focus on that experience with the felt sense in the body. That's what really starts to create that neuroplasticity. Other therapies that I use are really good in terms of internal family systems. Really helps create a healthy attachment with my core self, which is the ultimate attachment that can never be taken from me, divorce me, pass away, turn on me, whatever it may be. And so that, for me, is also a foundational thing. It's not an either or thing. So with my clients, we're working within and then we're working between. But it's really these kind of interventions that will really start to alter someone's attachment system at the deepest level. Another one that's great is emotionally focused couples therapy, that is, again, attachment focused, emotion focused, and very experiential. Working with different somatic oriented therapies, such as somatic experiencing, NARM is another one. And there's a lot of different things out there. These are particularly the ones I use. I've even been able to target specific felt sense things around insecure attachments with things like EMDR and brain spotting. But again, I would put ADP as probably like the number one up there with like attachment, focused interventions. The next step is developing secure relationships. Now, I know that has probably been extremely challenging for some of you due to these attachment wounds, in some cases attachment traumas. But what I would say is you've got to be on the lookout for people who have qualities that exhibit the capacity for secure attachment. So there's this stuff like consistency, dependability, reliability, safety, trust. If they don't have these qualities, all they're going to do is replicate your attachment wounds and your insecure attachment experience. And that may be, with your partner right now. If that's an extreme case, you may have to start looking at possibly separating from that relationship so I can heal, or is my partner willing to work on me with some of these things? Likely both of you have insecure attachment styles based on some of the wounds you experience. So having, whatever that may be, you can start on your own. Sometimes that creates positive changes in the partner, or if you're fortunate enough to have a partner who wants to engage in this work with you, that's great, but you've got to start identifying people. Or maybe you're not in a relationship, but like the friends I associate with, the acquaintances I associate, if they're people who shut down, withdraw, attack, criticize, shame, it's going to be challenging, if not impossible, to shift these patterns, because I need somebody who can do that. So all my clients know I'm a real person, have real emotions, I'm vulnerable just like they are in our sessions, because the relationship has to be real for them to heal. But my clients aren't asking themselves, oh God, what mood is John going to be in today? So even though I have, emotions, things like that, I've got to exhibit those qualities. So there's this secure base that they know within a range of, experience that they're going to get consistently the same John every time they come in. Because I want to create a secure attachment base that they can start to heal from and then extend out of their own to develop more and more of those relationships on their own. So again, whether it's on your own with friendships or your current relationship, start practicing the behaviors of someone who has secure attachment characteristics. So things like active listening, empathy, expressing your needs and wants clearly, trying to turn towards each other, in a way, or trying to hold space for each other to understand each other's individual experience. These are things that you can work on. They're challenging, but again, if you have that mindfulness, go extremely slow, track more in the moment, always focus more on the process of what's happening between you than the content of what you're talking about. Make this the secondary thing. Even though it may be important and may be stuff that you need to talk about, if you can't talk about it, your process is broken, it's not going to matter anyway. But use a piece of content as a means to an end to explore like how you're connecting with each other. Do things securely attached couples do, spend time together, engage in activities, have shared goals, physical affection. And I know for some of you, your capacities in these areas may be limited, but just start working on it. Start with what you can do and just get things moving a little bit at a time. The last thing is be persistent and patient. Again, you did not create these things. It was the failure of the environment. And some of these things can happen in very good homes, but it was either circumstantial. Maybe the divorce happened and one parent had the primary custody and they're working two jobs that are not around as much to help with some of these kind of things. And so the child's left, or the adolescent's left, dealing with a lot of stuff on their own. And it was just circumstantial. Other times parents are great in some areas but have deficits in other areas. Maybe they had to develop some of those defensive strategies to navigate their childhood and their upbringing, so they're not adept at certain emotional states, but it's not across the board that way. And so people say I had a good childhood and I was never abused. That tells me that they probably have a level of avoidance, that they were disassociating things, because people who did give you a clear narrative. Be self-compassionate and curious and just explore these things without judgment. Also celebrate milestones and victories along the way. A lot of times when you're in it, and you're trying so hard to get to this big goal of what you want with, you know, secure attachment in this case, you don't see all your incremental progress. You know, it's really like the turtle wins, not the hare in this kind of work. And so I have to constantly point things out to clients as I'll just sit there sometimes. It happened to me a couple times last week where I was just once it was my individual client, another couple I was working with a few days ago, where it just dawned on me just how different they are. And so I explicitly say that in the moment. It's like, wow, as I'm sitting here right now and just looking at you, the way you two are communicating, your energy and the way you're interacting, I'm just blown away. I mean, 6 months ago, 12 months ago, that would have been totally unheard of. You wouldn't even believe me if I told you would be here 6 months later. And they're like, yeah, I guess you're right, you know, because theirs is so focused on the big goal where they want to get to, the ultimate destination. They're not seeing that. So then what that does is that triggers a core emotional state of hope. That it's not a faith wishing thing. It's I see X, Y, Z happening. It makes me hopeful. It gives me energy that really drives towards change and motivates and fuels that. You know, we need to see something is happening to stay encouraged and motivated. So that's the end of the attachment thing. If you like more information on this, there's tons of resources out there. I'd be happy to share anything with you. If you want to contact us, you can speak to my wife, Bissan, or I anytime at hawkinscounselingcenter.com. We'd be glad to speak with you or refer you to more resources, or if you want to sit down and do some one-on-one work with us, working on your attachment style, we'd be more than happy to do that. Thanks for watching this video. Our mission here is to help as many people as possible. When you watch all the way to this point, more people get to see the video, so more help goes out. So that's a huge support to our mission when you do that, and then you get to be a part of helping other people. If you felt like this video helped you, please forward it on to somebody that you believe could benefit from it. And once again, I thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.